Welcome to Talk+Water, the podcast associated with the Texas+Water newsletter, which provides timely information on the spectrum of Texas water issues, including science, policy, and law. Texas+Water is published jointly by the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment at Texas State University, the Texas Water Journal, and the Texas Water Resources Institute at Texas A&M University. You can sign up for Texas+Water by visiting texas+water.org/newsletter. My name is Todd Votteler. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Texas+Water and the Texas Water Journal as well. And I will be your host today for Talk+Water. This is podcast number 8. My guest today is Dr. Rosario Sanchez, who is a senior research scientist and associate graduate faculty member at Texas A&M University's Texas Water Resources Institute. She's the Principal Investigator of the Transboundary Aquifer Assessment Act program funded by the USGS Survey. Her work is to integrate, develop, create, research data on transboundary aquifers between Mexico and the United States, particularly Texas. She has 15 years of academic and work experience on transboundary issues between Mexico and the U.S., and she's been working and publishing on transboundary water issues at the international and binational level since 2006. And she is now working on models for cooperation and management of transboundary aquifers between Mexico and the U.S. Welcome, Rosario, and thank you for being part of Talk+Water.
Thank you, Todd, for the invitation, and good morning.
Good morning to you. So let's start out with your background and how you first became involved with water issues.
My background is broad and diverse. I did my undergrad in international relations, and then I did my master's in diplomatic studies. So I worked for a couple of years for the Foreign Service, Mexico Foreign Service in the U.S. So I used to work with immigration issues between Mexico and the U.S. back in the days. And then I went back to Mexico for a couple of years, and that was 1994. And if you remember, 1994 drought, and there was a big issue between Mexico and Texas regarding the Mexico deliveries of the Rio Grande, because there was not enough water in the Amsterdam. So I was working for the state government of Coahuila, which was, the state that is responsible for holding those waters. Even though they're federal waters, the dam is located on the state of Coahuila. And I was working for the governor back then in the Foreign Affairs office. And the governor then decided to close the dam because we didn't have enough water in the state. So it became a big issue. Political issue, binational issue, and then, a hurricane came and we were friends again, right? So that was the moment that I became interested in water, and particularly binational waters or transboundary waters. I became involved in that. And later on, I guess it was a lucky shot, those kind of events that happen in your life that you end up doing something that you don't know how it happened. So I ended up at Texas A&M doing my PhD on water, and that's how I became involved in water. But still, I'm using my binational knowledge between Mexico and the U.S., but now focused in water. So that's why I love transboundary issues, and I love transboundary issues related to water now, and that's how it all started, and now I can't get out of it. Once you're there, you just can't get out of it.
Right. Well, that is really interesting to me because you are somebody who's got a perspective from Mexico's side of that issue. I heard, of course, nonstop about the water debt, as I think it was being called, but it was from people in Texas Water and representing the U.S. side. And so I never really heard a whole lot from anyone in Mexico about their opinion on how the treaty was being implemented or not being implemented.
Yeah, when there's drought, everybody wants the water, right?
Right.
Regardless of the treaty, regardless of the obligations. So if you need water and water is crossing your land and you know that water is committed to the U.S. and you need water, you're going to grab it. Regardless of, the federal government or the treaty or whatever. And that's what happened, actually. I mean, the ejido on the Mexico side was in need of water as well, just as the Texan side. I mean, we all need water, right? Mm-hmm. So, and when you are in need of great need of that water and your authorities are saying, you can't take that water because that's committed to Texas, well, I mean, it's like, what the hell? I mean, that's my water. It's here. It's in my land. I mean, it's in Mexico. I'm going to get it. So that's what happened in those days. And it got really rough domestically in Mexico. And it was really, it was rough between Mexico and Texas. But it was hard for Mexico, too, because the priorities, I mean, people starting to think like, okay, you are a traitor to our country. Why are you giving this water to Texas? Who cares about the treaty? Who cares about the obligation? I mean, care about your people first. I mean, where is your priority? All those questions that that they are valid at some point, but at the same time, I mean, there's a law that you have to follow. So it was rough back in the days, and luckily for everyone, we had the big hurricane. They came in, and that was it, right?
Right.
And that was solved. But that issue, and you know that every 5 years, you hear, if you have a drought and you don't have enough water in the international reservoirs, and you start hearing people complaining that Mexico is not paying, that, all those things. And we all are hoping, we are all crossing fingers for a hurricane to come. And then there's a big hurricane bigger than you actually need, and then there's flooding, and then there's all that. So
right.
It's a cycle. It's a cycle of good, bad relationships. It's a cycle of the water crisis. Goes up, goes down, goes up. But that's the way it has been since the climate is kind of not helping, I guess, to get more water in the river. Because we don't have more water in the river, and we're not going to have more water in the river in the future. So, I mean, that's where groundwater comes in.
Right. So, I want to get to that next, but you just want to, kind of point out that, that same scenario exists between New Mexico and Texas and Georgia and Florida, and states sharing the Colorado River before it's shared with Mexico. And it's not all that different. I mean, the public in one state sees the water. There may be a compact with the neighboring state, but you get in a drought, and it's hard for them to really think of the fact that, hey, that water may be committed to somebody else, and you got to let it go. It's just a tough
thing. I mean, those issues are the same, as you said, domestically and internationally. And here in the U.S., the difference with Mexico, the waters are federal ownership. They're owned by the federal government. So states really don't have much to say. States, cities, counties, or parallel counties in the Mexico side, they don't say much. It's all federal management. In the U.S., it's different because each state has its own way to manage water, right? They own their own waters. So it's kind of different countries within the same country. So so if you think about that, and you're in Mexico, if you want to negotiate transboundary waters, you have to negotiate with Texas, with Arizona, with California, with New Mexico, and with the United States at the same time. So they're different separate countries in a way, and it's it's challenging to think about when the treaty that we have over the Rio Grande and the Colorado River and the Tijuana River, I mean, it's surface water.
Right.
And I think it was a big deal back in the old days. I don't know how those guys actually were able to manage to get together and agree in something, because it's been successful. It has its limitations, of course, but it's been successful in terms of management of surface water. But then there's nothing on groundwater. Nothing. Not even an indication that we should consider that. So that's the big. That's becoming more and more a big issue between the two countries, because surface water is just what it is, and we're not going to get more of it, and it's already over allocated, and population it's increasing dramatically, especially in Texas and in the border region. Over the next 20 years, it's going to duplicate. So where is the water going to come from? It's not going to come from surface water. It's going to be more expensive to get surface water because it's going to be treated. You have to invest more on desalination. You have to invest more on water treatment. You have to invest more on conservation. But the real big sources of water are going to come from groundwater. And those aquifers are shared as well as surface water is shared.
Right.
But the difference is that we don't have anything there to manage shared groundwater resources. So I think it's a big issue. It's a huge challenge for both countries and among states as well, and even counties, even groundwater conservation districts. If we talk about just Texas, right?
Right.
I mean, they are the ones that actually make the decisions. They are the ones that actually control their wells. So if you want to deal with transboundary groundwater resources, you have to go down locally, very, very locally, to actually the owners of the wells. And then, from there, start going a little bit regional, and then probably state. I don't know if we are going to need to get into binational federal level, but we definitely need to get the locals involved. And that's a big difference compared to surface water.
So to go back to your initial foray into water, you were in surface water and you started looking at international water issues. And here's the United States, and some states, the state owns surface and groundwater, and then you've got Texas where the state owns the surface water, but groundwater is private property. And you looked at all that and you said, hey, I'm going to get it. This surface water stuff's too easy. I'm going to get into this groundwater stuff. It's a lot harder and a lot more complicated. And so I it's fascinating to me that you switched from surface water to groundwater, and there was so little known about those aquifers, those transboundary aquifers, and now you become the person who is providing a substantial amount of the information that's available.
Yes, and if you ask me why or how, what made me move into this hole, because it's a black hole, it's a real black hole here,
right?
Of transboundary groundwater resources, I honestly do not know the answer. I guess it all started when I realized that it was everything that we had between the two countries is surface water. And I said, well, what about groundwater? Let me start looking into it. And a couple of colleagues, asked me about that, like, hey, what do you know about this topic? And I said, well, I don't know much. Let me get into it and I'll get back to you. So when I started getting into it, I found out that there was nothing in there. And then not even in Mexico, not in the U.S., not in Texas, not in any border state. And I get back to Gabriel Exton, my colleague, my co-author as well. And I said, because we wanted to work on management. And I said, well, and I was working on an aquifer in the Laguna region in Mexico when I was doing my PhD. So I have being interested in groundwater because it's more challenging than surface water. It's not to say that surface water is solved, of course not, but you can see it, right?
Right.
Groundwater, you just can't see it. I mean, everything is simulation. Everything is 95% confidence, and there's always that 5% that it might not. It might go well, it might flow, it might not flow. So that's why I became interested. But then when it comes to transboundary groundwater resources, I said to my colleagues, you know what? There's no way we can even talk about management of groundwater resources in the border because we don't even know how many aquifers are in there. We don't even know what's the condition of the aquifers. We don't know where are they located. We don't know anything about that. We know some about a couple of points. And we don't even know enough of those points, but we know some of those. So I had to go back and I don't know why, but I seem to be the only one that is interested in transboundary groundwater resources. It's bilingual and have access to data on the Mexico side. I don't know why, but that seems to be the history of my career. I don't know if it's meant to be that way, but that's how I found out because I started looking for colleagues doing this kind of research on the Mexico side, and I didn't find many. It's like, so your maps go all the way to Texas? No, they all just go to the Mexico border. And on the U.S. side, does your maps go all the way to, do they cross the boundary? No, they all stop at the border. I was like, okay, who has done some maps, actually just mapping across? And there was nothing. Right. And then I went back. I said, so what's the problem? Why we haven't done that? Well, there's no data. There's no similar criteria. The data on the Mexico side, well, is in Spanish. And sometimes it's not complete. And we have to go back to literature of the 1960s. And nobody understands the Spanish publications on those days. And on the Texas side, well, we can't go to the Mexico side because we are a state institution, so we have to go through CILA. So all of those kind of small details that you think that we should be able to have. We should be able to overcome those challenges because we're in the border, right? We're in Texas, right? We're just 5 hours away. How come nobody has been looking into this at this level of detail? So I guess, okay, somebody has to do this job. Right. That's why I can't get out of it. Well, so it was hard. It has been hard.
Well, I recall in the 90s when I was first started working on the Edwards Aquifer issues, the maps that we were given showing where the aquifer was, was cut off at the border with Mexico. Exactly. And we were like, well, what? Okay, are there wells over there? Or is that going to impact what's going on as far east as Comal and San Marcos Springs, like wells in Uvalde and Medina County do? And so, there was just no information. And then I think back to, 15 years ago, it seems like, or maybe less, that with brackish groundwater, there was so little information about that in Texas. I remember questions coming up for groundwater districts when there was the first interest in tapping brackish groundwater to desalinate it. Some of the groundwater districts saying, well, I don't know, do we actually regulate that? We regulate the aquifer, but we actually regulate the brackish part as well as the freshwater part. And so, once brackish groundwater was identified as a future source of water, now all the information is coming. And so I'm kind of wondering a little bit, is that similar with transboundary aquifers? There's more interest now in part because they are starting to be seen as future supplies of water, or their existing supplies that now we're concerned about their sustainability.
Yeah, both. I would say both reasons, because they are future or current sources of water, because they're pumping water from those aquifers, believe me. The thing is that we don't know how much, right? We don't know how much at transboundary level, or the impact of those extraction at transboundary level, and in terms of not just water quantity but water quality as well. There are some regions in the border that there are not enough, not huge population centers, very limited extraction, but still they have important sources of water, good quality of water. So those are the points that are actually the ones that are exploring. The city of El Paso, for example, they are already, and they've been doing this for, I guess, the last 10 years, because, they've been planning ahead, and they are, they've been facing with the huge challenge of the depletion of the workable zone and the desalination there. And it's been huge, and the quality of water, they've been facing a crisis of groundwater there, because they're not, but they were 100% dependable on that aquifer. But they've been investing on a lot of technology and conservation and all that. But one of the alternatives and one of the strategies they're using, they are good enough sources of groundwater in the border in West Texas, on close to Presidio Bolson, the Green River Bolson. Those areas there, they have very small communities that are really not using that much of groundwater, so they're big sources of groundwater, and they are, I'm talking about 200, 300 miles away from El Paso, and they are already investing on getting that water, groundwater from that area to the city of El Paso for future supply. So I guess that's one of the reasons why transboundary groundwater resources are becoming more and more in the agenda, because there's the need for it, the future need, current need, and the fact that it's transboundary. So there's nothing legally governing that aspect of the resource on both sides of the border. And the same goes, the same is true on the Mexico side. Juarez is, that they are facing a huge problem there, and they are actually exporting groundwater from the Conejos Medanos, the neighbor aquifer, to the city of Juarez. So more and more interest, because we don't have more surface water that we can think of, and we don't have probably not enough money to desal or to treat surface water. So the easiest way is to keep pumping on those areas that are not regulated. And the Mexican law, the federal law on groundwater, up until today, I'm hearing news from the new government, but up until today, there are only 2 articles on the federal law that address groundwater. So in terms of management, which are really big, and nothing on transboundary groundwater resources. So and everybody that lives close to the border, that region is unique. It's nothing as the rest of the U.S., and it's nothing as the rest of Mexico. It's a whole country on its own, and it deserves and needs a special attention, because they have their own logic, they have their own relationship, they have their own way to understand how the economic and social and political system works, and the water needs as well. So I hope that in the near future, hopefully, Texas and the border states in the U.S. and Mexico, now that has a new government, realize that it needs really a huge, much more attention to the way the groundwater resources are being used. Because they're not managed, they're just used for whatever reason.
Right.
Or purpose. Yes.
So, kind of coming back to Texas, one of the issues early on that brought a lot of attention to overdrafting aquifers was the impact of groundwater pumping on springs and the impact that had on surface water. Are there impacts like that from the use of these transboundary aquifers that you or anybody else is seeing in Mexico?
Well, on that, particularly in some aquifers that we have been able to notice it, the Edwards aquifer, for example, is a transboundary aquifer. Even though some of my Texas friends doesn't like to hear that, doesn't like to hear that the Edwards is pumped on New Mexico. When they hear that, they become very nervous. Like, what do you mean? What is it pumping Mexico side? Is the Edwards Authority aware of that? And I said, well, it's a transboundary aquifer. And yes, it's been pumped by Mexicans on the Mexico side, and you don't know how much. So the Edwards is being fed, and there's some research. It's really, really premature to talk about this because we're working on this as we speak. But there are a lot of natural springs on the Mexico side that actually feeds the Edwards aquifer on the Mexico side. We don't know how much that is really connected to the U.S. or how much that actually impacts groundwater flows in the U.S., but it's definitely fed by natural springs on the Mexico side. The Allende Piedras Negras transboundary aquifers that is not being recognized as transboundary yet officially by the two countries. We are working on publishing that right now, that it is actually transboundary. Groundwater flows from one side to the other, given a specific extraction rate, and is used mostly on the Mexico side, and is fed mostly by natural springs on the Mexico side. So I don't know if you heard, lately there's been it's over the news that the new De Beer big Constellation Brands company, it's planning. They have a huge plant there in Piedras Negras, which is the border city of Eagle Pass, where the Piedras Negras aquifer is located. They pump huge amounts of water, and they use natural springs and artisan wells on the Mexico side for beer production, of course. But there's a lot of irrigation as well. They use natural springs for this. Now, it's not about who uses the water or who's pumping more water. The problem is that those natural springs are part of the Escondido River and San Rodrigo River, that they fed into those streams. That a portion of those streams is actually committed to the Rio Grande River, paid for the 1994 treaty. So, and nobody is actually regulating that. So it is assumed that the Escondido River and San Rodrigo River are going to feed a proportion of water to the Rio Grande River, because part of it is committed to the U.S. side. But nobody's actually looking at how much water is being pumped that has an impact on those springs that are supposed to feed the San Rodrigo and Escondido River that are sending water to the Rio Grande, to fulfill the obligations of the 1994 treaty. So, surface and groundwater are connected, whether we like it or not, and whether we manage it that way or not. They are connected and are impacting the system, the cycle, and eventually it's going to get political and economical and social implications, because beers, they're not going to stop pumping because we say so. I mean, there's nothing that they're not doing anything illegal. It's It's under the law. It's been protected by law. So why would they stop? And now in the news is, I don't know if you're familiar with Minute 242, which is it's an amendment to the treaty.
The 1944 treaty.
Yes, 1944 treaty. Minute 242 of the IBWC CLA states limiting extractions on the only aquifer between Mexico and between Mexico and the U.S., which is the Yuma Aquifer, between Sonora and Arizona, and part of California, actually. So that is the only aquifer that has some extraction limitations agreed by both countries. This was in the 1970s, and it was related to the salinization of the Rio Grande, the Rio Colorado deliveries to Mexico, and it was a big deal back in the days. But it led to this Minute 242. So you're not supposed to pump on 8 miles on each side of the river, because that has, some impact on groundwater of that region. So it's been announced lately that Constellation Brands Company is going to put a new plant exactly on the Mexicali Valley, which is going to have, that's what people say, it hasn't been proved, a great impact on the Yuma Aquifer in that region. But they are not locating the new plant within those 8 kilometer perimeter of protected area. But still, the level of extraction could have an impact on the aquifer. So, you start hearing those things, and people start asking you, is it connected or not? Is it going to be impacted or not? And we don't have enough data to say yes or no. And there's no way we can provide enough confidence, because we are, we've been studying these aquifers for the last, we started publishing the first publication was in 2016, and it's a huge responsibility for us to say something like it is going to have an impact. But we don't know. We don't know if it's going to have an impact now, because we don't have enough data, not from the Sonora side, not from the Mexico side, to prove that. And with that, there's an additional problem. The secrecy of data, trust, and confidence in the data. So let's say, okay, I have the data that you need. And then you look at the data. How trustful that data is. It depends where it comes from. It depends who did the data. It depends if it's enough. Are you giving me everything that you have, or you just giving me the part that you think that is not going to put you at risk? Because this becomes political at the end, and it's sensitive, very, very sensitive. Don't ask me why it has become that sensitive between the two countries. I think it has a lot to do that we don't know much, and they don't even know much. So when you don't know what's going on, I think it becomes you start feeling scared about what you don't know, and to invest, and it's not easy. Groundwater, get data on groundwater is not easy. You have to go back and you have to start drilling new holes, because the law is not forcing you to get the borehole data is not required by law, and in the Texas side, it is required. Does it, and sometimes it's hard reading, sometimes you don't understand it. So the quality of the data is an issue. The trust between the two countries related to the data that is being shared, it's a huge, huge issue. I think it's the biggest issue. If you ask me what is the biggest challenge that we have, data sharing. Whatever data we have, good or bad quality, we don't trust in each other's data. And we don't trust in each other just to give you the data that I have. Why do you need that data? What are you going to do with that data? How are you going to use that data? I don't want to tell you exactly how much water I have here, because you might like it, or you might not like it. Or I don't want to tell you what are my contamination risks on this side, if I have them, of course, because you might think that I'm doing something wrong, or you're going to, we don't want to have conflict. So let's not talk about this. That's the way I define groundwater resources in the border.
Okay.
Let's not just talk about this that easily, because we don't really know what's going on there. And do we want to know? That is the question. Do we want to know? And I say we are in the line of the water scarcity is driving and is pushing to know, right? And eventually we need to get there, but I don't know how fast, and I don't know exactly what it needs to be done, what political will or leadership we need to get that done soon. Sooner, better than later.
Right. So I want to go back and go through a couple of things quickly. So IBWC, International Boundary and Waters Commission, because not everybody listening will know what that is. And CELA is Mexico's environmental agency. That's correct?
No, CELA is the Mexican section of the IBWC.
Okay.
So the International Boundary and Water Commission, it has two sections, the U.S. side and the Mexico side. But in the Mexico side is called CELA, Comisión Internacional de Límites y Aguas, and in the U.S. side is called IBWC, which is International Boundary and Water Commission. But they work together. They're the same agency. Gotcha.
And Constellation Brands, is that a conglomerate, international beer maker that makes a lot of different beers?
Yes, it is an international conglomerate of beer, big beer producer. Okay. I don't have anything against beer. We all love beer.
That's right. Not every beer. There's some beers I don't like too much. But, okay. So you mentioned the 44 treaty between the United States and Mexico. So there's nothing in that treaty, or is there something in that treaty that directly or indirectly provides a mechanism to manage transboundary aquifers?
No, there is not. But there are a lot of things that are not addressed by the treaty, and still we have been able to address them in some way. IBWC has been able to do that because they are the institution in charge of making management of surface water in the river. There's nothing on groundwater in the treaty. There's nothing on quality of water. Really, de facto addressed by IBWC and CELA.
Gotcha.
Blah, 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 blah. And MENA 242 was the first, and more recently, MENA 226, if I'm not mistaken, 226, 227, which are related to Rio Colorado and the pool's strategy to deliver water to the Rio Colorado Delta on the Mexico side. I don't know if you heard about that.
Yeah, I have.
Those 2 minutes, pretty recent, 3-4 years ago, addressed indirectly impacts on groundwater. But those impacts on groundwater had to be necessarily directly related to surface water. Improvement on surface water and environmental. What I have been able to find out that everything that we have that indirectly relates to somehow groundwater or attention to groundwater has to do with environmental concerns. The surface water. You have to prove that it is connected to surface water. I don't know what they mean. Why it's connected. But you have to prove in some way that has an impact on the quality or quantity of surface water, and at the same time has an impact on environment and ecosystem protection. That's the way it happened in the delta of the Rio Colorado. That's how that relationship to groundwater was able to get there, because it's relationship with surface water and ecosystem preservation. And in Minute 242, it was in the 70s, was directly related to the quality of surface water that was being delivered to the Mexico side. So historically, we need to look for ways to get groundwater, to get people interested in groundwater if we are able to prove its impacts to quality and quantity of surface water and environmental concerns. Historically, that has been the way, but 1944 treaty does not address that.
Yeah, Rosario, I'm starting to lose you.
Hello? Can you hear me there?
I hear you now.
Okay. I don't know what happened. I haven't moved, I promise. So, anyway, Minute 242, Minute 3, 26 and 29, 27 and all the way to 29, actually. 26 through 29, they address at some point very little, like very shy, in a very shy way, groundwater. But that's basically it. That's all that we have.
And in terms, you talked about data earlier. I mean, is there data? These wells, I'm assuming, are not metered that we're talking about in Mexico. And so, does anyone actually have any data, or is it like, for example, with the Edwards Aquifer, people were using records of how much electricity they were using to say, well, we were running our groundwater pump, and that's how we calculated how much we were pumping.
Yes. On the Mexico side, well, what I can tell you is a centralized system. So if you ask me if groundwater is being metered on the Mexico side as a whole, 50% of the groundwater is actually being reported to be extracted. The other 50%, regardless of the border, regardless if the wells are located on the border or not, is not metered. So when it comes to the water in the border, so you can imagine it's far away from Mexico City. Yeah. And Conagua is just not enough, right? They need to have 500,000 people to be able to go through the country and, visit all the wells and check how actually people are, if they are actually metering the groundwater that's being extracted. So it's not possible. It's a centralized system. It's inefficient by definition. So we cannot expect that. So what we have right now, that's why I mentioned the issue of data, is the available data that we're able to get is from private industries, because they know their wells, and they know, and they have good quality of water because their business depends on that, right? So they do have good quality of water, but you have to go well by well. And who owns this well? And let's see, because it's private property. I mean, it's not private property, but they have the rights, and they are not obligated to share that data. They're private, right?
Right.
So you have to go talk to them and convince them some way. I mean, that's the dirty job that I have been able, or I have been trying to do on the Mexico side to get that data. And sometimes those wells are located in places that you don't want to go, right? Especially these days. It's not very secure. The border is not a secure region. It's never been. It never will be. I don't think so. So it's a double risk there. But you have, there are some regions that you are able to talk to people. They are, perceptive. They are interested as well. What's going on what's going on in this aquifer, and they are interested in what's going on the other side as well. Because I want to know what you people are doing on the other side. How much water are they actually extracting? Blah blah. Mm-hmm. And yes, we have been able to locate those electric logs that you mentioned, and I have a good team of people that helps me, translate what that actually means, geologically speaking. And we have been able to collect some of that data, and we are working on building our own data set. Because we just definitely, there's data all over. And it's not enough data, of course, but the data that we have is so diverse and sparse around, and you have to go X, B, C, D to get some data on just well A, and it's been challenging. So we're building our own data set with all the information that we have been able to collect from U.S. and Mexico side, and particularly Texas, right? And to be able to share that with people that are, we need data. We can't produce anything without data. So as limited as it is, and as, as with our reservations of the quality of the data is what we have so far. So we are building the data set, and we are sharing that data set on our portal. I don't know if you have been able to look into that. It's transboundary.tamu.edu.
So
it's a portal.
So that again. So where I gets that.
Transboundary.tamu.edu. That's our Transboundary Water Portal. If you Google Transboundary Water Portal, it should just show up there.
Okay.
And that's our data portal that we put it there just to set the example in a way that, okay, we know how hard it is to convince people to share data across. We know how hard it is to get the data. We know that it's not the best data, but we want to set the example. But here it is for you, because we can't do everything. And we need somebody else to say, hey, you're doing this wrong, because I have these all, other data here. Let's work together and don't start everything from scratch, because it's very hard. It's a huge responsibility, and we need to be able to get more people involved in this topic, and more scientists interested, and more colleagues on the Mexico side, and then the U.S. side, of course, to get this. And the data that we have been able to collect from both sides is there. It's available. It's publicly accessible, and that portal is pretty interesting, because we develop it in a way to commit people to share data as well. So the people that are, or the users of the water portal they are not given access unless they share data first. So the only requisite that we request on that portal is, okay, you're going to get access to all the data that we have, but first you need to share some of what you have. So it doesn't have to be like huge data sets or whatever. We don't request that. It's just share something, and sometimes they just share something that is already publicly, right? Mm-hmm. Publicly available, and it's okay for us. This is an exercise, for both countries. Like, start sharing whatever it is. Just start sharing, and it's okay. We're gonna, it's for us. It's okay. I kind of like to think that we're not going to hold that information, because that's the key problem. That's what this is about. We are not sharing anything, not even points of view or perspectives or anything on this topic. So we need to start talking. Just talk about it and get it and have access, and you can use all the data that we have. We don't care as long as you produce something with it that is going to help somebody to make a decision in the future, right?
Right.
That's what we're here for. We don't like to produce science for us or, for just to publish things. We need to spread the word. We need to share what we have and be able to do something with this, because it's really a big issue. It is a big issue.
So a few final questions here before we wrap up. I'm going to put two of them together here. Of course, Mexico has a relatively new administration, President Obrador, and of course, the United States is got President Trump now. Have you seen any changes with regard to the respective federal governments and transboundary aquifer issues with the new administrations?
Well, not per se, like transboundary groundwater issues, but I can tell you some signs, some events that can show us that we could have a good momentum, good political momentum. A couple of months ago, there was the first Transboundary Groundwater Summit organized by IBWC STILA. This is the first time that happened. It was this year. So everybody, that is working on this, on the border, all my colleagues, the same as always, we were all there, of course.
This was in El Paso?
Yes, it happened in El Paso. Yeah, this was in April, actually. It was in April. So we all were there, and everybody wanted to talk about that from the Mexico side and the U.S. side. The commissioners were there. The commitment was there, and at the end, we decided to follow up. Politically speaking, or, we didn't agree on anything. We didn't expect that, of course. It's too early. But at least there's the interest. There's the interest that something needs to be done. We don't know when, how, or what, but that was the first sign. So that's a good sign from both governments. Another sign under the new president of Mexico and the new director of CONAGUA, the National Water Commission, probably the new line is transparency in terms of data. So I have been able to access data that I was not able to access before because they had it hidden somewhere, and now it's publicly available on site. It is not necessarily related to the topic groundwater transboundary resources, but it's a good sign. We need transparency, right? And we need data sharing for this. So that's a good sign, I would say. I haven't heard anything particularly, specifically on transboundary groundwater resources. I think it's too early. I don't know if they will ever get into that because there are a lot of other issues in Mexico, and I'm sure you know about those. So, and some other priorities, insecurity and all that stuff, and surface water, and the scarcity and all that. I don't think they're going to be able to get to the border. They are concentrating more on immigration issues right now, and consular, and, diplomatic relationships, and protecting Mexicans on the U.S. side and all that. There has been changes related to that. I think he wants to focus on people right now, not necessarily to the resources, natural resources, which is not bad. I mean, I know there are priorities. It's just that how much time do you think we got, right?
Right.
For this. So some signs, some good signs, not enough.
Well,
on the U.S. side, President Trump, the only thing that he has been able to say related to the border or water is that he wanted to revisit the 1944 treaty. I mean, I don't know how he plans to do that. That's the Congress thing. And the other, and it's not a bad idea, by the way. Personally, I don't think it's a bad idea, but nothing has happened because it's a treaty, right? And it's ratified by the Congress. Right. And the second is the wall. and there have been some, articles or documents related how that would actually impact or what resources in the border. And I honestly laugh about it every time that somebody asks me about that. It's like, seriously, are you going to be willing to give up the river to Mexico? Because where are you going to build the wall? Yeah. You have to build it at least a couple of miles in your territory.
Yeah, I'm losing you there.
It's going to move. Exactly. You're going to be willing to give up territory to Mexico? So, anyway, those are the only things that I have heard related to that. So expecting more, of course.
Right. So I want to close with this question. I had an interview with Lena Salome earlier this year, who was a water mediation mediator for the United Nations for many years. And we were talking about how sometimes countries that have a hard time working together, that reaching some kind of agreement on water often kind of opens the door for further cooperation on a number of things. And I'm just curious, do you think there's any possibility that that more cooperation on water would be a way to engender cooperation on a number of other things between the United States and Mexico? I mean, we've got issues about air quality and other things. Any thoughts about that?
Definitely. The answer is definitely. Water helps. Water definitely helps. Why? Because, we all depend on that. So you're not willing to lose when it comes to water. So you can't afford to lose when it comes to water. So what is the other option? You have to sit and negotiate, right? Because you can't afford to lose. So it's too risky. I mean, it's dependability. The dependability is you can't do anything about it. Not even if you're rich or poor. If you have transboundary groundwater resources, you have to sit and negotiate. That there's no other way about it. So water helps people sit down and negotiate, not just about water, and sometimes preferable, not water, but something else. And you negotiate not just water, you negotiate a couple of other things. When the 1944 treaty was signed, back in the days between Mexico and the U.S., it was territory. It was water. It was the border. So it was not just about water itself, and it's been recognized as a very successful treaty. In IBWCC, the Commission, it's unique in the world, and they have been able to work together on this because you're not willing or you can't afford to lose. And whatever happens in the other side when it comes to water, eventually it's going to impact your side. So it's a win-win situation. It's always a win-win situation when it comes to water. So yes, I totally agree with her, and I totally disagree. The next word will be on water. I mean, I would say that's the other way around completely, at least from my personal perspective. Water is the element that's going to drive us together to sit and negotiate over whatever you want. If you have the element of water there, it's going to help. Right.
So you probably are familiar with the research done at Oregon State looking at
Aaron Wolf? Yes.
Right, Aaron, who's a friend of mine, and you just don't, you see water disputes not leading to war. And I think maybe what is true is that water conflict is maybe sometimes another thing between nations that adds to a whole list of things that might be bothering them about the other nation. But I don't think going to war for water specifically is very likely.
No, I don't think so. It's too risky. It's just too, you're not willing to lose. You can't lose. Why would you get into war with somebody that you have at least 1% chance of losing? You can't. You're not willing. I mean, as a government, I would never do that. I mean, and Aaron Wolf and Oregon State has proven that over 2,000 years, right? Back. I mean, we're not that, either you sit or you sit. And you can use water as something else, as to pressure, as a resource, as a weapon, but you're not going to risk to lose it. That's something else.
Right. Well, we're going to have to end it right there. We're right at an hour. And Rosario, I want to thank you for coming on Talk+Water.
Thank you, Todd, for the invitation. It was a pleasure. Hopefully I didn't get too carried away.
No, you did.
I can't help it.
No, you did great. I knew you would, and you did. So this has been Talk+Water, the podcast associated with Texas+Water newsletter, which provides timely information on the spectrum of Texas water issues, including science, policy, and law. Texas+Water is published jointly by the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment at Texas State University, the Texas Water Journal, and the Texas Water Resources Institute at Texas A&M University. You can sign up for Texas+Water by visiting texas+water.org/newsletter. My name is Todd Votteler, the host of Texas+Water. Let's talk water again soon.